Another day, another remake. I'm not complaining, I love this trend. Trials of Mana is a remake of the 1995 Super NES classic, which was originally titled Seiken Densetsu 3 in Japan and was a third in the Mana series. Despite not making it to the West until last year, the game did initially manage to build a huge following thanks to an English fan translation, which is where I was first introduced to the game. I have such fond memories crowding around the screen with a friend and cooperatively playing through the game with all of the different characters. A few years ago, I never would have thought that this classic would be considered for a remake, but the real question is Trials of Mana worth playing? Let's take a look. The Trials of Mana remake almost exactly retells the 25-year-old tale, which is essentially saving the world from evil and restoring peace across the land. While the core story is very dated and generally unengaging by today's standards, the way that it is delivered is something that is still fairly unique to this day and definitely worthy of some praise. What I mean is that your experience will change based on the characters that you've chosen for your party. There are 6 main characters to choose from. At the start of the game, you select a main party member and then 2 others who will eventually team up with your hero. While you do cross paths with all of the characters multiple times, the characters you choose will have their personal stories woven into your experience. For instance, I chose Angela, Kevin and Reese, and through my playthrough, their personal struggles and enemies made their way into my narrative. Had I selected other characters, the main antagonist and some other sections of this narrative would have been slightly different, even if the overall narrative progression remained the same. Also worth noting is that after the credits roll, there will be a few hours of post-game content to work through, and this provides the biggest challenge that the game has to offer. Progression through this story is very linear and leaves little to do away from the main plot. This was particularly evident when receiving world map transportation. Here the world is finally open to you, but there's absolutely nothing you can do here aside from go to your next story objective. The worst part here is that there are actually new locations to travel to. However, when you do this, they're all blocked off until they play some part in the story later in the game. To further modernize this remake, I was really hoping for some extra content to make the game feel a little less linear. I think the single biggest thing that I'll remember Trials of Mana for is its voice acting. Some could argue that it gives the game some kind of retro charm, but the fact is that it's probably the worst overall voice acting that I've experienced in a couple generations of gaming. Whether it be Angela's over sassy, entitled teenage princess voice, to Reese, who seems to pause mid-sentence, which is not how English works. But these two are nowhere near as bad as Kevin, who sounds like he just learned the English language yesterday.
Monsters all over Cascade Cavern, but I can fight. Fight with you and help. Kevin. My name is Kevin.
If you've played the game, you're probably wondering why I haven't mentioned the worst of the lot. Put it this way, I am so glad I didn't select Charlotte to be in my party. Imagine playing through 35 hours listening to this.
I got a little lost on the way and fell down. If you hadn't been there, it would have been good night, Charlotte.
And I can't move on without mentioning Angela's high-pitched squeal whenever she jumps or rolls. What's going on here? At least there's the option for Japanese voiceovers, but the question still remains, what were they thinking when recording these voices? Trials of Mana did a pretty good job in recreating what we loved in the past. The visuals look great and still retain the charm of the original, even if there were some delayed character textures at times. The music has also been completely reproduced and it sounds great. All of the tunes of the past are back and sound even better. There's also the option to retain the original tracks, which was a nice option. However, there is one large issue that I have with this remake, or rather, what was omitted. When I hear Seiken Densetsu 3, the first thing that comes to my mind is crazy fun couch co-op RPG. I was greatly disappointed to hear that Trials of Mana Remake would not include this feature. I think this was a mistake considering how fun this was in the past. Fortunately, the single player combat is a lot of fun. You take control of one character at a time and attack enemies with a combination of quick attacks and power attacks. You can also charge up your power attacks to do a little bit more damage, but I felt that this was only useful to break the enemy's shield rather than using it as a method of dishing out more damage. The enemy attacks are usually displayed by a red shape that show their area of effect, and trying to avoid these attacks play a huge huge part in your success in battle. The battles may be fast-paced and action-focused, but at any time you can stop time and select a spell or item to use. Additionally, up to 4 of these can be added to a shortcut menu if stopping time isn't your thing. Each character also has a series of class skills that can be used to dish out massive damage, provided that the character has enough CP. This adds a lot of strategic value, as I was constantly debating how and when to use these skills. The camera style has seen a bit of a change from the original. Rather than being able to see all of the characters on screen at a time, the camera is focused on one character. I didn't mind this change, but I did have a bit of an issue with the right analog stick being used for both camera rotation and switching enemies. This meant that when I had to manually center the camera around an enemy, the target would switch as well, forcing me to manually recenter once again. While you're only in control of one character, you are given the ability to switch between the 3 at any time. Those that you aren't controlling can be configured to act based on some fairly simple AI settings. This works well enough, however I do wish that we had the option to adjust the AI attack patterns mid-battle. Overall, for the most part, the battles are fast, control well, and create some enjoyable boss battles. In this regard, Square Enix did a great job in modernizing the core gameplay of the original. Oh, and I also suggest that you play the game on the hard setting if you want any sort of a challenge. Normal was just way too easy.
I'm actually the granddaughter of the Priest of Light.
Classes and skill points are the major character progression mechanics in Trials of Mana. Every time a character levels up, they'll receive some skill points to distribute on one of 5 core stats. For instance, putting points on Angela's spirit stat will not only increase her maximum MP and spirit, but also teach her light elemental spells. The real fun comes in with the class system. Once the character reaches certain levels, they can evolve into one of 2 possible classes, each coming with a different variety of skills that can be learnt. With 3 levels of classes, this means that there are 7 possible classes for each character, not including the extra post-game class. Aside from this, there is very little in the way of customization. I was particularly disappointed in how linear the weapon and armor progression remained. Basically, you enter a new town only to be faced with 1 or 2 new weapons or armor for each character to purchase, with the more expensive ones always being the more powerful. I would have liked to see some more variation in stats or added passive skills here so that I actually had to think about what equipment would best suit my needs. I love it how our favourite games from the past continue to be remade for current gen systems. I really hope that developers, Square Enix in particular, can keep this up because replaying through these classics is a lot of fun. Trials of Mana is one such example of a successful remake, with many of the modernised aspects working very well. The visuals and soundtrack retains the charm of the past and made it a pleasure to replay this simple tale, with a narrative structure that is still fairly unique to this day. The replayability that this brings is as good as it was in the past, and this is a highlight of Trials of Mana. The core combat system of the original makes a return, and it is better than it's ever been, even if the co-op function was entirely removed. Unfortunately, there were some other areas of Trials of Mana that were clearly stuck in the past, most notably the horrendous voice acting and the story that can seem a bit linear at times. If you, like myself, spent much of your childhood playing through the English fan translation of Seiken Densetsu 3, then I would recommend jumping into this remake, as it does a great job in representing what we loved in the past. What did you think of Trials of Mana? Let me know in the comments. This was Hellfire RPGs, thanks for watching. If you like this, hit like and sub, it helps out a lot. See you next time.